Hello friends. Before we start today's stories, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment which story you like most, where you're from, and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. October 29th, 2014 was supposed to be the easiest night of my life. I was 19. 2 semesters into community college, working weekends to keep gas in my car and books on the shelf. Babysitting the Morgan family had become a steady little gig. The Morgan house was in the kind of street where every mailbox looked like the other, and lawn sprinklers blinked in perfect synchronization at dawn. People waved from driveways like clockwork. I liked it there. The couple, Adrian and Claire Morgan, were courteous and paid promptly. They left detailed notes and always left a plate of whatever they'd ordered in case I wanted leftovers. They also trusted me with their 2 kids, Oliver, 8, and Mia, 5. So I figured responsibility, a Netflix account, and $40 for the evening was a fair trade. That night, they were going to a downtown charity gala. Claire kissed Oliver on the forehead, fussed with Mia's tiara, and handed me a list of emergency numbers the way people hand a lifeline. There were 5 numbers written in Claire's looping handwriting. It felt like overkill, but everyone did that now. Leave 1,000 ways to find you for the 3 hours you're gone. The kids were unusually wired on caramel apples their grandmother had sent. They sprinted around the living room in costumes that smelled of cheap plastic and bubble gum. Oliver was some vintage costumed hero with a cape he refused to remove. Mia insisted on calling herself Princess Aurora and adjusted her tiara like it was a crown bequeathed to her. We settled into the couch to watch a movie. I put on an old, family-friendly Halloween flick, something I figured would lull them. Trick-or-treaters came in waves, the older kids making elaborate stops, the tiny ones startling themselves in pumpkin-sewn costumes. The neighborhood was the picture of ordinary Halloween. At about 9, after I'd tucked Oliver into his bed and coaxed Mia into sleeping beside him because she was scared of monsters, I walked back to the living room. That's when I noticed someone standing at the far edge of the Morgan property, right where the trimmed lawn met the sidewalk. At first, I thought it was a parent waiting for a kid, maybe someone in an elaborate costume returning with the rest of their group. But there was something off. They wore a clown suit, white, visibly stained, with oversized pom-poms down the chest, and a mask. Not the cheap, smiling party store masks you could buy at a gas station. This face was elongated, the painted smile too wide, the red of the mouth dulled to a crusty brown by some old light. Even from inside, framed by the living room windows, the mask looked precise, like something made carefully to be wrong. I texted Marcus, my boyfriend, then and there. Marcus answers when it matters. He always did. He called instead of texting back, which only made me quieter on purpose. I remember whispering to him in the doorway, even though the kids were upstairs and the walls weren't thick. He told me to call the police if the guy didn't leave. I stalled. Who calls the police on a Halloween costume that creeps them out? I didn't want to be that girl. I didn't want him to laugh at me the way people do when reality doesn't line up with fear. But I didn't stop watching. The clown stopped after 5 minutes and began walking again. Not toward a group, not to take Halloween photos. He traced a slow circle around the house, keeping the same distance to the wall. No wider, no closer, gliding as if he had measured invisible guidelines. Every window I checked, he passed by, mask always slightly tilted toward the house as if listening. He never looked up. His head moved in a slow mechanical arc that made the back of my neck prickle. Marcus stayed on the phone with me for nearly 20 minutes. During that time, the clown completed 2 full circuits. I timed them because counting is the thing people do when they want to feel like they're in control. Each lap took approximately 6 minutes, steady, metronomic, like a watch wound too tightly. Eventually, the trick-or-treaters thinned by the streetlights. None of them looked at the clown. It was as if he were invisible to everyone under the age of 30. I told Marcus I'd try something. I flipped the porch light off, the universal signal that the house was out of candy. For a while, nothing changed. Then the clown began pacing a little closer, still maintaining that same invisible distance from the walls. I felt watched, in a way I'd only read about in books. The cheap, static hum of the television felt loud and brittle. At about 9:30, the policeman's siren I half expected never came. Instead, the clown paused at the driveway, then crossed the lawn, moving like someone taking tiny, precise steps. Not hurried, but intentional. He stopped at the edge of the path that led to the side of the house, the path to the basement door that led down away from the glow of the living room. The door sat there like a secret in the side of the house, an old wooden door with a rusted lock, painted to match the siding. I watched from the bay window as he placed his palm against the wood, then disappeared from sight behind a maple hedge. I called Marcus, voice breaking. By some inkling of instinct, he made me tell him exactly where I was and how long I'd been there. He insisted he'd come over. He told me to lock the front door, to stay put, to make myself scarce. I pulled the curtains, shut the blinds, and told Oliver to stay in bed. Mia was still pretending to sleep. A noise came from downstairs minutes later, so faint I might not have heard it if Marcus hadn't been making me narrate everything aloud. A scrape, then the thin click of metal. My chest hammered. I thought, sure, it could be a raccoon, a branch, anything, but nothing rational could explain the small metallic whisper that sounded like a picked lock. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Marcus. He said he was 15 minutes away. I felt ridiculous for having called him. When people ask why I went into that house again and took that babysitting job, there is a part of me that still argues back. Because it was money. Because I needed the hours. Because I told myself I'd been careful. But at that moment, I only knew I wanted someone else on the other end of the line. A voice that would not be a stranger's breath at the window. The next sound was a soft, patient exhale. Not a human breath. It was more like something listening to the house. I pressed myself against the living room wall, eyes wide, and watched the dark rectangle of the side door. The noise grew, a muted sliding, the faint rustle of fabric. Then a shadow moved across the basement window. A shape, long and thin, scraping past. Everything in me wanted to run upstairs, grab the kids, get in the car, and drive until the morning. Instead, I walked down the hall, like someone moving through someone else's life. I took the stairs one careful step at a time. The house smelled like pizza and lemon cleaner, and something older, like old paper back in a library. The basement door sat ajar when I reached it. Muddy footprints led away into the dark. I remember picking up a screwdriver from the counter on my way past, some ridiculous, childish, glue-on sense of preparedness, and slipping it into the waistband of my jeans. My hands shook so badly they left salt marks on the denim. The basement smelled the way basements do, a damp, hollow kind of smell. And then there was the subtle stink of decay underneath it. The hallway light flickered once. In the corner, something moved. I froze and then walked in its direction because not moving felt worse. The footprinted path led toward the laundry room, then around the furnace, then to the small door beneath the stairs. The door was open a handspan. I pushed it. It opened onto a low crawl space lined with boxes and old Halloween decorations, tinsel, a deflated reindeer with one missing eye. It should have been empty, but something was tucked into the furthest corner. There, wrapped in a smoked plastic bag and stained duct tape, was a bundle. I lifted it without thinking. The plastic crinkled like a living thing, and inside the bag, the edges of fabric emerged. White cloth, the edge of something with pom-poms. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the children upstairs would hear. I unrolled the plastic and found, folded with care, the same clown jumpsuit I'd watched moving around outside. The mask was somewhere inside, and a notebook, too, small and bound with black tape. My brain went cold around the edges. I remember steadying myself against a stack of cardboard boxes. I called Marcus again. He said he was 2 minutes away. I told him to come, to call the police, to not tell me to wait. He promised. He said the word like a weapon, and hung up. I brought the bundle upstairs like evidence, like some obscene present. I set it on the kitchen table and turned on every light. The mask was worse up close. Elongated cheekbones painted with careful, cruel ridges, glassy eyes that reflected the awful kitchen fluorescence, a smile that seemed to be carved from something that had once practiced laughing too long. In the pocket of the jumpsuit, a small black notebook lay crooked. When I opened it, the first entry was the Morgan address. The handwriting was neat. It listed times, patterns, what the parents did. There was a page with my name, my first and last, the time I arrived, the time I left. It was dated that day. There were other entries too, addresses, times, crude diagrams of porches, notes about pet dogs and locked side doors. Later, when the police took it and said the words pattern and obsession, I felt like someone riffing on a case study. At that moment, I only felt anger. Who would do this? Who would plan this? Who had watched my face while I fed the kids and tucked them in? Marcus arrived in a blue blur of breath and promises. He had his hands on my shoulders, and I remember thinking his palms were cold. He dialed 911 with a thumb that trembled. The police arrived. They were considerate, polite, and frazzled. They asked me the same questions 3 different ways. One detective, an older woman with tired eyes, looked at the notebook like it tasted of old secrets. The evidence tech in plastic gloves bagged the mask and the suit like they were relics of a crime long since practiced. Marcus stayed with me all night. The Morgans returned home to flashing lights and awkward apologies. Claire held both kids until she shook. They didn't sleep in that house again. The Morgans rented it out a month later and put their much-beloved house up for sale 3 months after that. People in the neighborhood whispered. I went back to school. I tried to forget. You try to let it become something that happened to someone else. For 3 years, I did exactly that. Tried to reassign the memory to the past folder. I slept with the bedroom lamp on. I avoided basements. I changed locks. I learned a small, tactical list of survival habits. Never put your phone down on a counter. Always sit with your back to a solid wall when in public. Keep a set of keys in your hand when you walk outside. Fear, I discovered, becomes a curriculum. 2 autumns after that night, the world slid into an odd, quieter version of itself. Marcus and I split up. Young love is elastic. He stayed in town and bought a house 2 blocks from where the Morgans had lived. He became the kind of man who turned his yard into a weekend project, who loved the smell of oil and machine. We stayed friends. Years later, 2, maybe 3, I got a text from Marcus at dawn. "You aren't going to believe what I found," it said. He sent a picture of a soaked plastic bag in a hole he dug while planting a sapling in his backyard. Inside, the same features: the faded clown jumpsuit, the mask with its brown smile, and another battered notebook. Only this notebook stretched the story. Its pages were a slow, careful chronicle of neighborhoods over months and years. Addresses, times, patterns. A list of homes that ended with a word here and there. Vacant, and moved, and sealed. The Morgans were there, of course. Old entry from October 2014. And then an entry from almost 2 years later. A house 2 streets over. The same method. Same mask. It wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern. Detectives said it could be a collector, someone who kept the things as trophies. Others said it might be a person obsessed with ritual. The notebooks had an ugly intimacy, the kind of written curiosity that turned people into projects. Whoever it was, they had been watching more than one family. I discovered, reading Marcus's photographs, that my name appeared on the list of observations. Not as a target per se. There were a dozen names cataloged, innocuous details like what time I arrived and left. Someone had notated when the porch light went out. Someone had decided what kind of people lived in these houses and when they were most vulnerable. The new pages added entries into 2016 and beyond. Someone had practiced this over years. Marcus, who had the naivete of someone who still believed in tidy endings, called the local police and asked about possible connections. The cops said these sorts of notebooks were sometimes kept by people who collected costumes. Some officers shrugged and said there was rarely enough evidence to pursue anything. The masks themselves, if found buried, were often dry enough to blame on the weather, the homework of preteen troublemakers. But we weren't troublemakers, and Oliver and Mia's faces gleamed like ghosts in my nightmares. In the margin of one of the newer notebooks, I found a set of dates circling October 31st of every year. I stopped sleeping. It's hard to explain how a line of ink on a page can make your blood run cold, but I remember the sting of it. A series of rings like a calendar marked with teeth. The most recent entries were less than a month old. I moved 2 cities away after that. The move was the kind of ritual people enact when they think distance will work like salt. It didn't. It only reoriented the fear. Every Halloween, the sound of distant laughter pricked at me. Boxes of things I had packed away, costumes, old decorations, suddenly felt like evidence. And then, 2 autumns after I thought I had outrun everything, Marcus called me in the middle of his own Saturday morning to tell me he had hit something with his shovel. He said it casually, like you read the paper and find a small note about a tree. He was planting a young maple to replace a dead stump when his shovel clanged against something wrapped in black plastic. He dug down 3 feet and found another package, duct-taped thickly, wrapped like a time capsule of cruelty. A mask, a suit, a notebook. The notebook this time was thicker, stuffed with more pages, more home addresses. And on the inside cover was something that made every muscle in my body want to flee. A list of children's names, some crossed off, some not, and a column of dates next to them. We called the police again. They took the items, took our statements. Detectives cross-referenced the addresses with open files, cold cases, neighborhood reports. There were some matches, An unsolved disappearance in a small town 2 counties over. A fire in a rental house that had been blamed on faulty wiring. But nothing conclusive. Justice takes patience. And sometimes it doesn't come at all. Years peeled by in routines. The notebook's finds spread over a broader map. Names and times ticked across the pages, like someone marking a harvest. The writing never varied much. Neat, practiced, almost clinical. The mask never changed. Same suit, same smile. The idea lodged inside my mind that perhaps the thing wasn't wearing the mask to hide its face, but to claim the personality the mask represented. A shape without a name, rehearsing friendliness and perversion at once. I kept finding little traces of that night inside my life. A driveway that looked strangely familiar. A child's tiara glittering abandoned in a store. The same yellow-lit porch that could have belonged to any house. When Halloween rolled around, I couldn't help but imagine those slow, metronomic laps. I made lists of exits and cars. I learned which houses had cameras. Then, 2 years ago, around the beginning of October, I received a short, anonymous message on an old social app I'd long forgotten about. It was not typed like a joke. It read, simply, "Do you remember?" My first instinct was to ignore it. My second was to assume spam. But my fingers betrayed me. I opened the message as if opening a wound. Someone on the other end had replied with a photograph. It was a picture of a house with a pale porch light, taken from the angle I had once stood behind the living room glass. The message had one line: "We move slowly." I forwarded it to the detective who'd kept a file on the cluster of reports. He wrote back 2 days later, asking if I still had any of the old evidence. I did not. It had been cataloged, photographed, and then returned, or maybe kept. The chain of custody was a tangle of forms and annotations. The detective said they would open a small task force if any new evidence turned up. I told myself the message was a troll, some attempt at creepy nostalgia. But the old recurrence, the way the mask found its way into the world, managed to keep appearing in the margins of my life. It was like an echo that never quite faded. The notebook found in Marcus's backyard had, once photographed and processed, revealed even more terrifying details. There were names of neighborhoods that showed up again and again. A map with circles drawn around clusters of houses, notations like "no dogs" or "new lock." Whoever was compiling these observations curated details like one collects stamps, systematically. The entries were not haphazard. They were plans. A week after the detective sent me a terse note about a reopened file, I got a call in the middle of the night. It was Marcus. He was calm, practically clinical, explaining between himself and the sirens in the background. "They dug up something in Pine Hollow," he said, "near the old mill on the 3rd lot." Pine Hollow is the cluster of dilapidated houses at the edge of town, where teenagers still dare each other to go at night. The police had been excavating for hours. They had found a cache of items in a cellar sealed under a concrete slab, old masks, an assemblage of photographs, and a stack of notebooks. There were more entries. Some listed houses that had been burnt. Some were annotated with small sketches of a toe pointing left, or a window with a broken latch. One of the notebooks had a page that made them stop. It named a family who had moved away 5 months earlier, and beside the name it said, "Not yet." It was not a note of completion. It was an intention. Detectives fed the new items into their database. They compared patterns. There were traces linking the notebooks to properties across 3 counties. Each discovery only widened the net of suspicion. Nothing ever had a face attached to it. No CCTV had captured a recognized vehicle. A few blurry photos showed the same silhouette moving through hedges, slim, with the looseness of a suit that had been worn before. But silhouettes do not arrest people. I went to the hearing the police convened for witnesses. Only an intake, the kind where people sit in folding chairs and give a version of the same story. I babysat. There was a clown, a mask, a note. There was comfort in the company of others who had felt watched the same way. Still, the air was full of small, exhausted truths. We were all tired of waiting for a theory to solidify into a person. Months became a slow drumbeat of reminders, and reminders of reminders. The notebooks continued to appear in odd places, buried beneath playground equipment, shoved in the crawl spaces of condemned houses. Wilson, an old man from the opposite side of town, found one stuffed under a floorboard in his barn. Each time the police learned a little more, each time they failed to learn enough. There came a season when Halloween itself started to feel like an alarm. I spent it writing down names of places and dates. I watched local news more than I wanted to. My friends tired of the topic. You need to live, they said. Living, to them, meant forgetting. I tried to do that for a while. I dated. I took a job that made me use fluorescent lights all day. I took a month-long trip to a place with no maple trees. But the notebooks had taken root in my imagination. They threaded the world like a seam. There was something very human in the way the entries recorded routine details. The names of pets, the color of front doors, the brand of grill on each porch. Evidence of someone paying attention to life in a way that was not benign. Men in masks, I learned, are often the kind of people who slowly work up to being seen. Then, 2 Halloweens ago, a new thing happened. A local artist, working on a historical mural for the town center, used an old photograph taken in 1979 in a collage. People who were into those little history groups recognized a figure in the corner of the picture. A man in a white, ruffled costume at the edge of a fairground. It was the same kind of outfit, different from the mask I remembered, but the pose was unmistakable. The person in the photograph looked out of frame. The town's forum filled with speculation. Some wrote of a local fair tradition. Others wrote about the same old notebooks, how these costumes appeared in collective memory the way a pattern might across decades. I read every comment, hungry and empty. What terrifies more than the physical is the implication of continuity, something older than us that keeps returning. The mask in the photographs was a whisper from the past across decades. If the mask is a thing that passes through time, then what else is passing? At the last press conference I attended, the chief detective said quietly into a microphone, "We have evidence of a network of activity. We are following leads in multiple directions. We believe at least one person is responsible for maintaining this collection." The words were factual and cold. They felt like something being read from a manual. I wanted to believe in the neatness of that sentence. I wanted to believe in arrest and verdict and a neat summary paragraph in a paper the following day. I wanted closure, like the kind you can click and close on a browser tab. Instead, I learned the truth of a thing that will not be neatly wrapped up. Closure is a privilege, not a guarantee. A few months later, Marcus died in a car accident. The news was blunt and ordinary and wrong in a way I didn't understand. He was the kind of person who would have sat through evidence like a bad film, who would have taken note. He left his house to be auctioned, and the crew clearing the place found a small, rusted tin under floorboards in the back bedroom where he had planted a small garden the summer before. Inside that tin were 3 slips of paper, an address, a brief sentence, he watches the corner, and 1 word: soon. Soon became a calendar I counted backwards from. I moved cities again. Not out of fear this time, but because there wasn't anywhere to stay inside the color of my life. The notebooks, the masks, the houses, they became reserves of paranoia I carried like a ledger. People told me to leave it behind. I tried. Then, last October, I got a call from a reporter who reminded me of the case. "Your name came up in connection with the items we found," she said. "Some of the notebooks you mentioned are now being examined. They're making a documentary." The thought that someone else would spend hours sifting through pages I had once cared about did not comfort me. It made me ask, are we allowing stories to live because we want to be safe, or because we want to be remembered? That Halloween, I opened every window and set no lights out. I sat in a house that did not belong to me, staring at a dark street and hoping the dullness of suburban night would serve as a shield. I drank tea that tasted of nothing and scrolled through feeds until the phone warmed in my hand. I tried not to fall asleep. At 2:03 a.m., my phone buzzed with an image. It was the kind of message that cuts because it flattens tools you thought you had into brittle instruments. The image was a wide-angle shot of a small, grassy lot, trees on one side, a sagging shed on the other. The caption read, "He returns." There was no identity attached, no account handle, no trace. I called the local detective. "Did you file that?" I asked. He said, "No." I asked, "Is this the person?" He said nothing and asked me where I was. I told him. He did not sound surprised. Neighbors have a kind of hearing for small changes, the way towns do. They call one person, and that person calls another. I was tired of being the index for every embarrassment of fear. It had become a whisper network I couldn't leave. I asked the detective if they were increasing patrols. He said they were. We are taught that if you name something, you control it. We are not taught that some things abide being recorded. They accumulate through attention, through the very act of being watched. The night the package came, the mail carrier, barely awake, left a small, unmarked envelope on the doorstep. Inside it were 3 things: a leaf pressed flat, a single Polaroid with nothing in it but a smear of dark on the corner, and a scrap of paper with a single sentence, the kind that lives inside your throat and for a moment threatens to spill out and never stop. "You saw me once. You saw me once." I thought of the basement and how the pages of the notebooks had cataloged lifeways of other people. I thought of the clown moving around a house like an invisible metronome, and I felt something in me split. The knowledge that sometimes the past is not finished with you, and the knowledge that the past will keep visiting whatever you call home. I stopped answering calls I didn't recognize. I changed my number twice, each time thinking it would be symbolic. It was not symbolic. It was inefficient and expensive. I burned the clothes I couldn't separate from the memory of my hands. I replaced all the exterior locks on the little rental house I lived in, and the man at the hardware store, who had heard more than his share of strange requests, gave me a look that said he understood. For years, the universe made its mess of us quietly. People who follow, people who collect, people who fashion masks to cover what they are. Tonight, I am not writing to ask for pity. I am writing because telling the story feels like a small act of resistance. If you read this, and you are a parent leaving your home for a night, if you are a teenager laughing on a porch, if you are someone who thinks Halloween is only a costume, please look hard at the edges. A month ago, the detective called again. "We found something," he said. His voice was clipped. There was the soft rustle of paper in the background. He told me they had dug up a shallow grave under an abandoned property outside of town and found a series of items that matched the descriptions in the notebooks. There were photographs, some degraded, but recognizable for the way the edges curled. There was a mask in a state of decomposition that matched others. There were names that matched families. And there was one thing that stopped me like a hand around the throat. A page with my name and a date beside it. My name. Not in the past tense, but as an entry. An intention. They fingerprinted the latest notebooks. They traced pen loops. They ran the ink through labs. They compared the curve of a certain capital M to signatures on municipal forms. The police announced at a press conference that they had a person of interest. The town exhaled and then forgot to hold its breath. The person of interest had a file in another county for petty theft, a mugshot that did not look like the figure in the mask, because the mask removes detail and makes a single expression permanent. The person they arrested, when they finally did, had no neat explanation for the notebooks. He denied everything, said he collected costumes. He said he loved old things. He said he liked to catalog. He left people on the edge of belief because denial sounds plausible when the evidence is mostly old cloth. The courtrooms are slow and public, and in their slow procession, they tend to siphon away terror and leave behind a procedural residue. At the hearing, I walked into a small, tiled room smelling of lemon and dust and sat facing the defense attorney and a man who looked like any other neighbor. He did not look like a monster. He looked like someone who had been careful to practice an expression. His face was flat and polite. The mask, when shown in evidence, was small and pale and less monstrous up close than it had been in memory. The notebook, when shown, leaned at an angle that made the handwriting ordinary. But here's the rub. Monsters do not always look monstrous when you bring them into the bright cold of courtrooms. They look like neighbors, like colleagues, like the nice person with the humorous Facebook comments about their cat. The horror I felt the night I babysat did not rewrite itself into something that would always fit into an indictment. The man was found guilty of trespass, of tampering with property, and of possessing stolen items. He was convicted on a few minor charges. The larger accusations, the ones that had no physical body to prove, were left unresolved. The notebooks continued to hold secrets. Some of the names on those pages never found a match in court records. The face behind the mask, the person who had worn it and moved around our houses and slept inside crawl spaces, was not always one person. Sometimes it was the idea of a person repeated. You might ask if I sleep now. The truth is, I do, in fits. Sometimes I dream that the clown still walks the perimeter of a house I lived in once. Sometimes I dream that the mask waits at the corner of my street, that the taillights of cars curve like commas, and it watches the pause between them. Sometimes I wake and the house feels the way the beach feels in winter, vast, quiet, and waiting. I learned that some things are ritual and therefore repeat. The mask, the suit, what they represent is not merely a physical item, but a procedure. When people invent ritual, they repeat shape and rhythm until the pattern is completed. This is not to say there isn't a small measure of closure. The man convicted of trespass no longer lives in the neighborhood. The notebooks found on his property revealed entries that implicated other people. But evidence is messy, and human law is messier. Some pages remain unread. Some addresses lead to houses that have been remodeled, families who moved somewhere else, names that echoed in other places. The police tell me they are monitoring and that any new reports will be taken seriously. They keep telling me that because it is their job to say this. Their words are gratefully small things. So I tell this story because I think it matters to say. A mask is a mask is a mask. But when someone records where and when and why they put that mask down, when they take weather readings of porch lights and catalog pets and cross off children's birthdays, then the mask in itself becomes a method. If you are making a Halloween video, if you leave your porch light on as an invitation, if you are running late and your house will sit empty for a few hours, I want you to remember that the hallucination of safety can be a dangerous thing. Horror is not always sudden and violent. Sometimes it's a slow, precise pressure, the accretion of small invasions that, in themselves, seem explainable. If there is any finality in this story, it is this. People who become collections of other people's lives do so because someone is paying attention. The wrong sort of attention is a kind of theft. We are left with the obvious and the ordinary. Locks, lights, cameras. We are left with being watchful for one another. On the anniversary of that night, a new house, a new city, I stand in a kitchen that is not the Morgan house, and I look out at a yard that will require mowing. I teach myself again to put the phone face down on the counter so I can breathe without the knowledge of a notification. And, once in a while, when the wind moves right, when the maple leaves brush the gutter, I swear I can hear footsteps outside the house, slow and deliberate, keeping that same metronome. We are left with the knowledge that some people collect. We can lock our doors and plant hedges and teach our children to call first. But we are never completely safe from the idea of being observed. Maybe that is the real terror, that something as small as attention could grow into something bigger. The masks are gone now, for the most part, scattered into evidence drawers or incinerated in the back lots of police departments. The notebooks that were legible are in cold storage, the pages scanned as PDF files and tucked away where officials can point at them and pretend the story is contained. But things that are ritual tend to resurface, a different mask, a different notch in a page. Old ideas don't die, they change forms. If I could give you one small tactical piece of advice in the practical world, put a camera facing your porch, leave a motion light on, and teach your children and yourself to notice strangers who linger. If you hear of someone in a costume who seems to be watching rather than joining, call someone. Not because you will always solve the problem, but because the act of calling puts another set of eyes on the same person. The network of attention matters. It is not glamorous, it is not heroic. It is pedestrian and stubborn as a lamppost. If I could give you one final note in the emotional world, it is this. Once you have been watched, it doesn't leave you simply because you moved addresses. The world stores our moments like fossils, and later images can look like evidence. That does not make you fragile. It just makes you human. A thin, small paragraph in a police report once read, "Victim exhibits ongoing symptoms of hypervigilance following repeated exposure to pattern of stalking behavior. Counseling recommended. The counseling helped. So did the community of people who believed me instead of asking why I had not called sooner. I don't want to end on a note of terror. I want to end on a note of vigilance, of refusal to let ritual abuse become normal. Wear your safety like a coat. Talk about it. Teach kids that costumes are about play, not persistence. Teach neighbors to notice. And when you make your Halloween videos, use images of empty porches and quiet lawns, the way we use warnings on cigarette packs. Small images that tell what can happen if you ignore what habits are doing to homes.